Hey, it's Chris, Liege Games. Let's talk Awaken Realms. Let's talk a little bit on the lighter side. Awaken Realms Lite and their latest game, Platformer. Now, what do you need to know about this 2 to 4 player Mario Ice Climbers-esque race to the top, avoid being dropped off the bottom outside of the screen or falling down via gravity? Well, let's talk about it. Let's take a look. Let's see what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, everything in between, my thoughts, my concerns, my questions, and just overall how I felt about it. So, that sounds interesting to you? Let's take a look. Platformer. So this is the latest 2 to 4 player game, like I mentioned, coming to Gamefound from Awaken Realms' lighter side of things, literally named Lite. Now, this has a very different aesthetic, it has a very different feel, and it has a very different scope, as evidenced by the name of the company, the name of the publishing side of things in the first place. Because it is not grandiose in design, scale, or scope like the other Awaken Realms mainline properties. And it's not trying to be, let's be very clear. As I mentioned, this very much is reminiscent and uses mechanics more familiar to the platforming side of video games, where you are slowly rising up, and as you rise up, or as the game forces you to rise up, stuff below you is lost. And if you cannot rise fast enough, you also die. And it takes that concept, it takes a very unique gravity concept, mechanic, and uses it in order to facilitate that in the first place. If that sounds interesting, well, let's take a brief look at just some very quick overview and some mechanics, and then I'll give you my final thoughts with likes, dislikes, and everything in between. So here is the standard setup for what would essentially be more of a 3-player game for Platformer. You have a number of levels equal to essentially, unless you want to make a taller than average or taller than required game, of the level 1, level 2, and level 3. And then you have the boss level. And in this case, we are talking about Medusa. And so what happens is you just flip over one of these level 1s, one of these level 2s, and one of the level 3s, and then you put those specific ones out on these little spawn points that have little skulls on them. Then obviously you have your coin spots, then you have your gem spots, and then you have your little shop spots as well. We'll blow this up here so you can see it in a little bit more detail. Now the red outlined squares, as you'll notice, are more of the trap areas, meaning if you land on them, you take a damage. And then what you're having is, a limited life supply of said hero cards that you're worrying about in the first place. And so this tells you everything. And this is Mixie, for example, talking about those health points. She only has 1. After each reroll step, you may turn 1 die to any symbol you want. And if you roll a star, she can use that either as a skull, which is the thing that allows you to move the bad guys around, or a boot, which is your movement. And so she can really get what she wants, but she only has 1 health, so she really needs to watch out for some of these other areas. Now, what you're going to have happen as you go up and work your way up is you just can't go through walls. And so that is the only thing. But you'll notice that, otherwise there's no restriction in terms of where you're putting your person. But during your turn, you have the option to apply the gravity effect, which then means if somebody's sitting over here, whoops, all of a sudden, whoosh. But you may want the coin. You may need to defeat the villain who is right here. You may not be able to get all the way across. And so you need to be able to sometimes risk it in that sense. Or you might just try and scale as fast as you can up here because this is a platformer. The key mechanic here is when you are 2 levels higher than somebody else, those levels disappear. And then if you're on them, then rinse and repeat. And so if you wanted to customize this and say make it, 4 or even 6 tiles high, you could. And I think just from the limited gameplay I've had, I would recommend playing it with at least 2 of these to give a lot more variability in terms of this way. Because if you're playing as just the 2-player recommended setup of just 1 of these, it doesn't give quite as much flavor and it's quite tight. And so there's not as much maneuvering in that sense. So I like it better with that in, even though the 2-player setup recommends initially only 1 column. Over here, as I mentioned, are said crystals. Those are a currency of a certain type. Then over here you have your gold. Again, you get that by beating the monsters. They all have bounties. And most of the monsters, though, at the lower levels, have a gold bounty. The higher level ones are getting you crystals. Well, and you go, well, why crystals? Well, you have these 2 decks over here on the far side. One here is the potions, and the other here are the items. And so there is going to be a market out there. And so 2 of these are going to be face up at any one time. So in this case, we have a shuriken and goggles. And so the goggles ignore wounds from traps, and the shurikens discard 3 swords and deal 2 wounds to any enemy on the same tile. So you don't even have to be adjacent otherwise, because usually you have to have an enemy just adjacent to you, not diagonal or orthogonal now, adjacent to be able to cause the damage. And if you move away from an enemy that is next to you, you also take damage. And this is where the mitigation and the movement of the enemies become so important. And that is where these dice come in to be really important, because they all have 1 of each symbol except for the boot, which is on each one twice. Because, let's be clear, this is a platformer, and moving, going up said tower is by far and away the most important thing. Now, you'll notice that there are also ladders on here. Ladders prevent you, if you are on a ladder, from dropping gravity-wise. Also, otherwise, these platforms prevent you from falling all the way down. And there is fall damage. There is that sense of, okay, if that happens, I'm gonna pass through. Now, you can land on people, but it usually pushes you to, like, you know, one side. It pushes them out of the way in that sense. But you're rolling these dice. You're Yahtzeeing, saying, okay, look, I have, that's incredible. I have 4 boots and a star, and one of the character's powers is to turn the star into a boot. So I could literally start down here and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and get up to there already. And so that would be a huge difference. But are there bad guys here? Am I going to take damage because I'm passing bad guys? Am I moving the bad guy? Am I using these skulls to then move the bad guy into the way of my opponent? So if my opponent wants to move and they don't roll any skulls, they're going to have to take damage. And if you die, the active person gets your coins, or the next active person, if you were the active person. They're going to benefit from a little bit of indirect take that. And then you have the swords. Obviously, well, the swords are for the monsters. The monsters all have how much damage they do to you. They also have how much health they have, and they have their movement. So you can go through all of that very easily at the bottom of their cards too. The one last thing I didn't talk about is said potions, because you also have potions that you can buy from. And again, cost in the lower right-hand corner. And okay, for example, discard this item and any symbol to your dice results, and then discard this item during your reroll step, turn 1, die to any symbol you want. So again, variability there, hefty stack of those, hefty stack of these. Now, I didn't show you or tell you about the monsters at all, but the monsters are actually these little acrylic tiles here. And so it's really interesting. I don't know if this is going to be a final product or if this is just going to be for the prototype copy, but it'll be interesting to see what actually happens with them. And then you just lay them out, and they're very easily manipulated. I was just sliding around. And they follow the same movement rules as the heroes. Now, the last thing we didn't talk about, and we moved everything else out of the way so you could see it a little bit better, is the Medusa. And Medusa has her own special tiles, and they have this special icon, the mirror, on it. Because if you're anything knowledgeable about Greek mythology or Medusa in general, they used a mirror to cast her own reflection back at her, which turned her into stone. And so you can reflect some of the damage if you have one of these mirror tokens, which you get by going to that tile first and then going to attack her, because she actually has her own attack cards. And what you need to know about this is you'll also see on her attack cards that they each have a symbol. If I actually had the camera in range here, they each have a symbol at the bottom of them, which corresponds to these dice, right? And so if your roll is this, for example, and you end up with this is a perfect example, you have the most skulls here. And so she would do this skull power on that player's turn. And that happens once this top layer has been revealed. Not if you're there, it just happens once it gets revealed. Once you get to the first level of this tile. It doesn't matter if everybody's there or just one person's there, it just starts going, and then it goes until the game ends. And she, again, has her own tile, she has her own unique ability, she has her own movement, her own attack, and her own health. And it says for the base game, most of these are 2 times the number of levels. So you saw that in this game, there were 3 levels and plus Medusa's level, so 4 levels, so she would have 8 health. And winner is just whoever does the last damage. Not who does the most damage, not who does the first damage, whoever does the last hit. Whoever kill steals. That is the name of the game. That is platformer. There you go. So, platformer. Now that you've seen a little bit, what did I like? It's fast. It's quick. Turns are quick. Decisions are quick. There's not a lot of overhead. It's nice in that sense. It works well. The gravity mechanic is definitely unique. It's definitely weird. It definitely takes a time or two to get used to manipulating yourself, as well as, seriously manipulating the enemies. And that's something we're not used to doing in these games, right? We're used to playing the enemies. We're not used to being able to manipulate the enemies, not only to get out of our way, but to get in the way of others, or to drop them, or to cause them to die in the first place. I like that. It's a unique mechanic. I'd like to see it more in the future. I like the moving up system of the tiles. I like the ability to customize if you want to make it a little bit longer. If you want to make it a little bit taller of a tower, you can easily do that just by adding layers. It doesn't constrict you from or stop you from doing that. Some other questions, some other interesting things to note. And I'm not going to say they're either positives or negatives, because I think it depends on what side of the board, excuse the pun, you fall on. One, it's chibis. I mean, they're very beautiful to look at right now. The tokens that you saw are very beautiful. I'm not sure what those are going to be, if those are going to be cardboard, if those are going to be acrylic. I don't know what those final products are going to look like. Also, I mean, I only have the one boss from this prototype, the Medusa boss, and so how many other bosses and variables are there going to be? Same thing with the level 1s, the level 2s, and the level 3s. They're, apart from minor tweaks in the stats, I'd like to see some more nuance there. Slightly more different abilities. Now, sort of like what they did with Marvel United. You can have a very tight core set of actions and things that are able to be manipulated, but you can still come up with unique, creative ways to do that. And that's what I'd like to see on more of these. Because then I think you would worry less about the amount of overall 1s, 2s, and 3s that you have, right? So that would be very helpful. And I mean, I'm saying this before seeing the Gamefound page whatsoever after it launches. So all of this could be moot by the time it launches and, just already there. The other side of things is, and this is a pro and a con, is that the penalty for dying is very low. It loses your coins or half your coins, but it's sort of not a big enough penalty to also make you, depending on how you want to play, if you just want to play super aggressive and die and just climb as fast as you can and say screw it and see how far I can get before I die, yeah, you can go ahead and do that and get to the top and cause other people to drop off and have that issue and change the dynamic, as opposed to this careful crawling like you're sort of doing the first game or two, like, okay, I'm going to manipulate this guy here so I don't attack because I only got 3 life, and we're not used to dying in these games. And so this game doesn't really incentivize you to be super careful. It is sort of a mad rush. And if you want that out of a game, sort of like your Super Mario, when the lava is climbing and the game is forcing you to go up, even if you're trying to go over here and grab the star, go over here and grab the coins, go over here and get Yoshi, you might not have time to all do that. And so that's what you can sort of do in this game. Now, having only played it mainly at a 2-person player count, I think it's going to be better at 3 and 4. 2-player counts is really this 1 tile width column. And I think really where the game is going to shine is you've got 2 or 3 wide where stuff is really moving and flowing, and you can create bigger gaps sideways, you can create bigger gaps vertically. The 2-player 1x3-ish just doesn't give a whole lot of room for manipulation. It doesn't allow you to fully experience the gravity mechanic, the monster manipulation mechanics. It just doesn't. And so if you're looking for more of a solely two-player game, I would say, look elsewhere. But if you want something that's really going to shine at 3 or 4, and it's going to be light, it's going to be easy, it's going to be quick to play, I mean, this is, I think, where it really probably shines. In terms of the purely chaotic fun. Depending on, again, your playstyle, you can play it any way that you choose in terms of the ways I just mentioned. Quick and just ruthless and just climbing, sheer caution thrown to the wind. Or if you want to play it smooth, calm, and collected and try and deftly maneuver your way up. Regardless, though, one of the other issues, and I guess this is a plus minus, again, as dealing with a lot of other games, I mean, we tend to be hoarders, right? I want to get a lot of equipment. I'm going to need to get a couple of these potions. And resources in this game are relatively tight. I mean, yeah, you can roll for coins a bunch, but then you're not getting a whole lot of other stuff. Then you're not defeating monsters. And defeating monsters is a faster way to get them if you can. It just is. Especially if the monsters are giving you crystals. Crystals are going to allow you to kill the boss faster. It's just done. And if you're playing at a larger player count, there's going to be more across the board. There's going to be just more availability from a monster standpoint as well in terms of bounties. And that's, again, I think where it's really going to shine better at the 3 or 4 player count. And I think another thing that you have to be aware of when you're playing this game is, again, how right is this game for you? Because of that purely chaotic nature or that very methodical nature, depending on how you want to climb, is this going to be of your ilk? Because it has take that. Although it does take that in a very different way in terms of more manipulating your character and the monsters rather than you directly attacking or detrimenting someone else directly. It is more indirect take that considerably, especially with the use of the gravity mechanic. And if you are not a fan of take that, and this indirect take that is a little bit more appealing in terms of manipulating things, you may like this more. Now, if you want more head-to-head direct take that, skirmish, battling, I slog you, you slog me, again, this is not what this game is. But if you go into it with that mindset, you're definitely going to be either disappointed or you're going to be frustrated at the beginning. But you can also see the gears turning, especially when I played it for the first time or two and going, oh, and having one of those moments. And then sort of going, oh, I get it now. Now I'm really going to mess with you when you're going out on a metaphorical, literal limb, and I'm going to cause you to drop, and yeah, we'll do it that way, if that's how you want to play. Because that's definitely an aspect of things, too. I mean, again, with the variability of the heroes, of slight asymmetry there in terms of powers, and then also slight asymmetry in terms of health, the equipment store in terms of the potions and the items, again, it's just very limited. We're used to playing games where you have a higher opportunity to get those and you become dependent on them, and they really can help mitigate things. And that's kind of true here. At the same time, it kind of isn't necessary. I mean, you can kind of go one route or the other. You can go heavy crystals and just doing that route, or you can go heavy equipment, gold, and buying them and then try and scale. And again, it's offering you a little bit of variability there. But if you don't want that, then obviously you won't like this. But it's a very entertaining, light Mario lava rising. I have not seen that mechanic done elsewhere. I want to see it done elsewhere now. The only other thing I can even compare it to is like Machina Arcana, if you're familiar with that, which is a completely other, heavier dungeon crawler where you can literally get rid of enemies by just going further over a grid, and that whole grid just disappears. And that's the only other game I can think of that uses something very similar in a positive way for your characters, although that's cooperative, and this is definitely not. So I really like that mechanic in terms of literally and metaphorically maybe balancing the player field. So overall, what are my final thoughts? I think at this point for me, because I play primarily at 2 and sometimes 3, it's not quite as a hit as I would like because of my own personal tastes. Not because this is a bad game. I think this is a very entertaining, very different, very good twist on stuff we haven't seen before in terms of the gravity and the tile laying, tile flipping, rising mechanic. And it's cool. And it is fun. but it's definitely not for everyone either. It's one of those that, yeah, I'd be happy to play it. Somebody pulls that out. Sure, absolutely. 30 minutes, boom. Boom, 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 boom. Little chaos, little fun, little creativity in how you're manipulating things. 3-4 players, absolutely. Do I need it in my collection? I don't know, just because stuff getting to the table of that ilk, I tend to lean heavier towards the co-ops, the abstracts, the cards. But that's me personally. So, there you go. Again, see everything on the Gamefound page, everything that entails, all of the monsters, all of the bosses, all of the variability that I'm sure is going to just be there, and how much, deeper and flexible this game is going to make it from that side of things. And with Awaken Realms, no matter what side of things, they're going to be creative, and it's going to be entertaining. And this is no exception to that. Hope that was helpful. Hope that was useful. As always, if that was, best thing you can do for me. Otherwise, have a good day. Thanks for watching. Stay classy. Hopefully I'll see you around.